everybody. I'm Dr. 𝗵𝗁 Taylor, founder of Work Solutions and Work Global News Magazine, and I am excited to present you with another amazing interview from our Changemaker series. And today we're featuring Pat Alacqua. He is a business growth strategist, author, and entrepreneur. And Pat helps leadership teams to navigate the leap from growth to scale without losing what makes their companies unique. He works with leadership teams to embed planning and execution systems that adapt to change and accelerate results. And you know, here at Work Global News Magazine, we are all about celebrating change makers and building resilient and diverse workplaces. Now, in addition to all of the awesome things that Pat does, he is the author of Obstacles to Opportunities, Transforming Business Challenges into Triumphs. And Pat prepares organizations to anchor decisions to outcomes, anticipate what they will break as they scale, and fix it before it actually does. Now, what I love about Pat's approach is that he blends real-world experience with practical tools to ensure that leaders master operational and mindset shifts. Oh, that's right up my alley there. Needed to build resilient, adaptable, and sustainable business. So, hey, Pat, how are you doing today?
Okay, Christy, I'm doing great. Looking forward to talking. I need to take you on the road with me to, be my hype person, that was a pretty good introduction. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, here at Work Global News and at Work Solutions, I really enjoy talking to people who lead change initiatives, so much of the buzzwords that I use, resiliency, mindset, adaptability, you have it right here in your bio. So this is going to be a great conversation. Now, I'm going to start with the first question. And you guys know, I say it all the time. I love talking to coaches because coaches, we are speaking from some type of experience. And Pat, you started your entrepreneurial journey young, working about 70-hour summer weeks by 6th grade. Wow. What did those early experiences teach you about leadership or the nature of business that still sticks with you today?
Oh, geez. Numbers of things, Chrissy. I think at the time I had no idea what was teaching me, right? It's such a young age, and being around family businesses where we were my family was just trying to make a living, right? But a couple of things that resonate with me right now is I think two lessons stuck with me. First, it created a real curiosity for me to figure out how business really runs. Okay. And not just on the surface, but from the systems perspective. Right. And then I guess, secondly, it really gave me the respect for the people who show up every day to make something work within a business. Right. I always say, a business is a system of relationships. I mean, I'm a system and process guy, but it's still, as you know, all about the people, and it's a system of relationships. So, whether it was spending time in my grandfather's small town grocery store or working those summers at the Jersey Shore, watching my mom help him with his small motel, and I worked at a public pool and a bike rental shop, right? And I thought I was in heaven working 60 hours a week and making a few pennies, right? But I think I began to see firsthand, what it takes to keep a business alive, not knowing what I was looking at, right? But and I think those experiences today sort of, they shape my work ethic, and I think they still drive me today, because I think respecting the people doing the work, and always asking how the business runs is sort of at my core. And I'll say one other thing, and then I'll come up for air, Christy. To this day, I still drive my wife crazy. We'll walk in somewhere, and let's say if I was back on the boardwalk on the Jersey Shore, I'd be walking into a t-shirt place, and I'd be saying, geez, I wonder how this works. And my wife's always hitting me over the head. She said, will you shut up and leave that at home, But so I think just being around it at that young age, it really had me really curious about how everything works.
Well, I have to ask you this question, because as a former teacher, what were your favorite subjects in school? Because when I hear someone who says, I worked all of these hours, but I was really interested in the systems, I just have to ask, what were your favorite subjects? Was it math, science, or what are the things that you enjoyed growing up learning?
You know, I wasn't crazy about science. Okay. You know, I was good at math. All right. But you know, it's funny. Maybe like a lot of kids, I did enough to get by. I mean, I got A's and B's, you know, I got good grades, and I did enough to get by. I had a real desire for learning, and it wasn't until I really started my businesses. It wasn't in school, you know, and I think part of it came from I had to survive, right? Right. I better learn because I got to figure this out, you know. Now that old story is be careful what you ask for, you just might get it. Well, I was in business. And I was getting what I wanted, but I better be careful because now I got to go figure out what I got to do, you know. And but in school, I didn't have a real desire to read books at that time and things of that sort. But it was, you know, when I got into the business world, the curiosity for that, I guess that love of the business process really had me, and also survival, you know. I think that drove sort of my motivation to learn, and then it sort of pick up the momentum, right? Where you just, you know, even with young kids today, you know, when they're learning, they're growing, and they're having fun, right? So for me, always learning something new, but my vehicle is business. It's not, you know, it wasn't that math course in school, if you hear what I'm saying.
I was just curious about because you had this level of curiosity at a young age to understand systems and processes, right? And I think sometimes, you know, can be a different way of thinking, but you also had that entrepreneurial spirit, because there is no way in the 6th grade that I'm going to be working 70 hours a week. So I applaud you. Yeah. Right? Now, what I hear you said, as you've done this work in the realm of entrepreneurship, one of the things you said is that you can't scale the hustle. That's such a powerful statement. And what was that breaking point that helped you to realize that you needed to shift from being a doer to a builder? That is so hard for so many entrepreneurs because we want to have our hands in everything, right? How do you help entrepreneurs shift? What was your breaking point when you had to say, I got to shift from being a doer to a builder? And how can leaders recognize that they can become their own bottlenecks at times?
Boy, great question, Christy, and that's a mouthful. You know, I guess for me, starting with me to answer your question, I think it was exhaustion. All right, you know, the hours, and it just wasn't the hours; it was the constant mind drain, right? The time to think, you know, and I think I always gravitated to systems and process, but you know, I don't know that I necessarily saw myself that way, right? But you know, even though I was that kind of a person, I still had everything running through me. Every road came through me, right? As I was growing, especially as I was growing my trade show services business, which was the one in my early career, and I think you know, any leader, or at least for me, you start recognizing that everything slows down without your direct involvement, you know, and in that moment, you know, that's the moment where you better stop trying to carry it all and build, you know, scale or systems or the people. I remember waking up one day and I was angry at the people around me, because it was like, I can't do anymore. And what I was saying something to the fact of, come on now, I need, you know, you guys have got to jump in here. You know why? You know, if I'm doing it all, why do I need you? Right. I mean, but I had to look in the mirror, because it was sort of like, I love doing it. And why would anybody want to take it away from me? I just wanted to do it. Right. So for me, I think it was exhaustion. And then finally recognizing that everything was slowing down, and ultimately I just couldn't do it anymore, and I had to look in the mirror. And you know, Chrissy, you know that old term people use, the definition of insanity, right? Everything, you know, keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So for me, it's sort of like, and what I try to say to leaders is, it really is insanity to think that for you to think you and plan and execute the same way and expect it to work as your business grows. If you really step back and think about that, right? And so it said to me, I got to make some changes here. And for me, I found a mentor, and that shift had me looking at, I got to keep that entrepreneurial spirit and that energy. And my partner was the same way, but we got to blend it more with management systems. And that's a different kind of system. I like the systems of doing other things, but putting management systems in to scale yourself is another whole thing. But, so I think exhaustion got me. Okay. I had to change. It was like I was sort of rock bottom from that perspective. I was burning out, and I had to find another way, because it just didn't make sense to blame anybody else. I ultimately looked in the mirror.
Yeah, because sometimes, running a business and it's this entrepreneurship thing. And I kind of feel like, from a scaling standpoint, I'm definitely in the beginning, right? It's easy when you're like, I call that a little side hustle. For like 7 or 8 years, I'm writing resumes, and that was what I was doing. And all of a sudden you're going to scale. It's a learning process, and it could be so difficult. And this is where we talk about entrepreneurs becoming their own bottlenecks, right? Because you exhaust yourself, because you're trying to do every aspect of the business and you don't have systems in place. And so this is why many businesses, they struggle, because they try to scale. They get the idea. So we'll meet somebody like Pat, and it's like, oh, I need to scale. But to your point, there are different types of systems, right? And so many businesses, they actually go out and they try to scale without the right system. And so what's one operational blind spot that you see most often when companies are growing, and how do you help teams to address it before it stalls progress?
There's several, but I think the one at the core, Chrissy, I alluded to it earlier, is recognizing that to scale using the same thinking that got you there is not going to get you to that next stage, right? That's the classic thing. What got you here won't get you there. It's that moment in time, right? And if you recognize that, a lot of times you can find your own clues for how to do that. But we always tend to get stuck, because we get stuck. I get stuck anyway. And I think many of us do, because we keep trying to think it through. But we got to look at it differently. That's what perspective is, right? And so in that, I think the bridge to change at that point is first recognizing that every stage of growth requires a leader to transform themselves, right? And you can't transform a company without transforming yourself. And you've got to transform yourself at each stage of growth. Okay. And right. And I think recognizing that helps you find the clues. And then you start building a bridge with roles, clarity. How do you adjust your role? How do you adjust the roles, for the next level of growth for the people that are in the organization, right? Because, so, and then I think everything starts from there. Decision rights become clearer, right? But so much comes from roles, whether you're in a business, you're on a team of any sort. We all have to play roles, and those roles change, right?
So you've done all of this work, and we're going to talk about some of the many systems that you have, but I'm going to talk about this book, Obstacles to Opportunity, Transforming Business into Triumphs. Some of the same advice that you're giving right now, Pat, is that what inspired and motivated you to do this book, all of these experiences that you have, and what does the book focus on and talk about?
Chrissy, I think, one thing I remember back in my early years of my trade show business, my partner and I saying, we were fighting so many battles. We said, we got to write a book someday, right? As many people would probably say in growing their businesses, right? Well, we never got around to that, right? But as I got through my career and actually wrote the book, I decided to write it the way that I did, because it's sort of, in one sense, it's my journey. It doesn't necessarily, it's not about me and all the things I accomplished. It's all the things I learned. And in the book, I there's a lot of really successful people that could say the same things I am that wanted to sort of pay it forward, and they allowed me to tell their story. So they're included in the book. But it was, I wanted to, you know, my journey was back to that curiosity and that learning, okay? My journey was either I sought people out or they just happened to appear at the right time when I needed that to get out of that stuck phase and get to the next stage, right? And they helped me step around so many landmines. So I wanted to write this book as a way to say, you know, to touch a number of people that would say, you know what, take a look at this book. And there's a lot of tips in here. It's a lot of actionable content. And the purpose of it is, I just want to help you get from A to B faster. You know, I benefited so much from other people that taught me, mentored me, gave me their tips. And myself and the people in this book were trying to do the same thing. And I guess one other thing I'll say on it, 𝗪𝗲, is I'm proud of the book because, and I'll say it this way, because I've had so many people say to me, they take a highlighter out and highlight things. And I don't mean that as a plug, okay? Even though, yeah, I want to put the book in more people's hands, but that was the intention, for you to look at this thing, whether you read it cover to cover, you look at certain areas of it, there's frameworks, there's ideas, there's, you know, if people are highlighting it and taking a tip, you know, that's gold for me, you know, because that's how I've read books my entire life. Frankly, I don't always read books from cover to cover. I go in and I get what I want. I get enough context, and then I want actionable content to go do something. So the reason I did it, that was my journey, and I had people help me. So maybe we can help some others get access to some tips. And you know, and in that process was my journey, and I wanted to help other people.
Now we're going to continue to talk about some of these systems, right? But one of the things that you have just in the past few minutes of this interview said over and over again that I really want to touch on and hear more of your perspective on is part of that scaling process and growing your business is leveraging the power of people. Because you talked about these systems, but you have talked a lot about how you went out there, that part of changing your mindset, part of your personal growth was you went out and sought out and connected with people, or people seem to show up at the right time to help get you to that next level. And that's anybody or organization who even partners or works with you. That's an example, because they're going out and getting that expertise of somebody who's experienced this, who can help them scale. So I just want you to talk a little bit more about that. And then let's go into some of these frameworks that you use and talk about to support businesses with their growths and shifts and putting systems in place.
Yeah. Well, 𝗪𝗲, you know, when you talk about finding the people, I think, you know, no matter what level we are in our experiences or what we've accomplished, I think if we always have two things, curiosity to keep learning, because that's that lifelong learner, right? I think to be a strong leader, to grow a business, you've got to embrace learning, especially an entrepreneur, because an entrepreneur's job is, you know, or any leader, it's like when there's gaps of getting something done, you got to figure it out.
Yes.
Right. So it's a constant learning process, right? And so if you're curious and want to be a learner, and then you always look at things like, I don't know what I don't know, right? You know, and none of us should be, no matter what our accomplishments are, arrogant enough to think that we have all the answers, right? So I think those two things, curiosity, and no matter what situation we're in, have an attitude that we don't know what we don't know. The clues are there for what we need to seek out. And then there are so many people that we can have access to. You know, forget whether it's someone like myself, there's people around all of us, okay, that have been where we want to go or can help us find those people. And we don't have to recreate the wheel. And gosh, I could write a whole book on the numbers of people that have been in my life that way. And I give them so much of the credit for whatever success someone might say I've had. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because I think that what I love about what you said is that you never are at a point where you know too much. You should always be learning. And one of the processes that you have is called the Windshield process. And you actually, now, are you using this when you go into larger organizations, or do you use it with entrepreneurs specifically? But whatever the framework that you're about to explain to us, the goal is to help leaders manage assumptions and not just activities, right? So can you kind of walk us through what this looks like in action and how it shifts a team from firefighting mode to readiness? And I'm assuming that this is, where do you leverage this at, in large organizations, or can it be used at any level?
Great question. When I look at, to me, the first stage of transitioning, first off, this windshield piece, and I'll answer that question, Christy. This windshield piece is the foundation of planning differently. Okay, there's three things that I focus on in trying to help businesses or leaders scale. Okay, again, growth is different than scale, right? Growth is growing the revenue. Scale is figuring out how to do it with minimal chaos, right? Okay, and there's three things they got to do differently. They got to figure out how to think differently, plan differently, and execute differently. So the planning foundation, to me, is this windshield process, okay? And typically a company, let's say a company in the $5 to $100 million range is really where typically the first big management system transition has to take place, okay? All right, and that's what I find now. Frankly, it should be happening a whole lot earlier than that 75 to 100 million. But the growing pains come in because they might be at that 75 to 100 million level, and they might still be operating on those 30 to 50 million dollar systems. Okay, or and I say that in a comparison way, right? Not necessarily a literal way, but so in that, I think when you talk about big or small company, I think that's the sweet spot for the first big transition. And that's why you see so many entrepreneurial companies, they fail, not because they don't have the ability to sustain. They don't make this first transition to thinking differently, planning differently, and executing differently. Now, the larger companies, they typically have something in place, right? But they may have gaps, or there might be a different way of thinking. So, I spend most of my time with the companies in the initial phase, whatever revenue level they are. But if I work with leaders in a larger company, a lot of times we'll walk through these systems or work with them to help them think differently. Even if there's another system that their company uses, there's parts of this system they can use, or it's a great way to learn how to think in a different way. And then you just attach your new thinking into whatever system's being used in your company, if that makes sense. Right? So I'm sorry, you're going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say, go ahead, because you really got me thinking when you're talking about, because we talk about so much when it comes to mindset shifts as entrepreneurs, right? But you are talking like mindset shifts within a company, because you do. And I know that you talk a lot about mental shifts. That's just being part of the critical. That is just part of any operational shift, right? So we often talk about mind shifts at the individual level, but part of transitioning an organization or a business, no matter what level, is that there has to be a mind shift within the business. So what mindset shift was the hardest for you personally, and how do you help leaders make those same changes without burning out or giving out as they push to make changes within their organization? I was going to say, because the mindset shift really, we say cultural shift from an organizational perspective, but it's the same in many ways, right? When you're trying to lead change in an organization.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And you know what, Chrissy, what I always try to say to people is everyone will focus on the systems. And I talk a lot about the systems, right? Mm-hmm. They're critical, but the people there's psychological things. There's the mental things. There's the mindset things that prevent us from using the systems, and I always say I'm not a psychologist, but sometimes just by talking about those things and making leaders aware of them, they can play that inner game and at least manage that, and by being more self-aware so that they can figure out, okay, why aren't I using this system? So, so now, and they can make those shifts. But the real mindset ones, they come into 3 areas. Okay. And I'll tell you which one was mine. To me, they come back to 3 things. It's in an organization, especially in the early stages, but every leader, no matter what size of the organization, they go through this transition, and the cultures go through this transition, especially in your smaller companies, which is the need for control. Mm-hmm. Okay. The identity that we get because of what we accomplish ourselves, that doer mentality versus that builder mentality, getting that, having to learn to get things done through other people. But what holds us back is we get our identity, our self-worth, how we feel about ourselves from what we are personally accomplishing, right? Versus getting it done through others. And then there's that control. And then there's that desire, that validation issue. So many of us have that desire to be liked, right? Yeah. And how can we play that tough love sometimes that we have to play when we're leading people or making decisions? And for me, the issue was control. Okay. I always joke, I'm still a control freak. I was always a control freak. I'm still a control freak. Okay. I've learned to manage that. Okay. And manage it in different ways. Instead of me being involved in everything, I learned how I had to let go. And, you learn to lead through information, or you learn to set the right values in your culture so that you can let go. Right. But so for me, it's like helping them make that transition from doer to builder to strategic thinker. At the highest level, those are the 3 transitions that leaders make and have to make depending on the stage of growth of the company. Okay. And for me, it was control, but it always comes back to those mental issues that we can put all the systems in the world, but how do you get a culture? How do you get a whole company to make that shift? Because especially in your early stage companies that I was alluding to earlier, everyone's working in the business and there's no time to work on the business.
I've heard that before.
And systems are working on the business. So how do you manage that? I always say to leaders, you got to have 1 foot in the present and 1 foot in the future. Okay. And the 1 foot in the present helps you because you got to work in the business, but you got to have that 1 foot in the future, present and future. The future is how do you work on the business? And that's the systems, et cetera. But gosh, it's the mental, it's the mindset that prevents that from happening. Hopefully I answered your question, Christy.
Yeah, because I have a framework that I use for social impact from an HR perspective to drive change. And one of the things we talk about is leaders' mindset has to change, right? So even though we work in different sectors, it starts with the leaders because those leaders are going to influence that cultural shift. And one of the things that you said, Pat, was that people don't always want to give up control. So think about this. If I have somebody in my organization and it's time for us to shift who was comfortable, who had control, the control, that could be even difficult as a leader to influence. And that's why it starts with you as a leader, because you're influencing that culture. And sometimes we do have people that work within the context of the culture of the organization that don't want to help move this along or put new systems in place, right? We think about, which is a whole nother conversation. We think about AI and all these changes that are happening to the workplace, right?
Right.
Some people don't want to embrace it or resist it, right? And leverage it as a tool. Now, I want to talk about 2 more of your frameworks because you have a 6-step collaboration template that you say that is important for synergy. And then you also have a 3 C's framework that's the backbone of your work. So let's talk about the 6-step collaboration template first, because you have a lot of frameworks and systems, right? So what makes a collaboration truly successful in your experience? And how do you apply that 6-step collaboration template to maximize that?
Okay, great question. What I've found is, first of all, Christy, I think today, gosh, we can accomplish so much more with collaboration, right? Because there's always bandwidth gaps, there's always skill gaps, and there's always knowledge gaps, no matter what, right? And collaboration, putting the right people in the room, okay, whether it's inside or outside your company, helps you fill those gaps, right? No matter how many resources we've got. And so I love the collaboration process because it's so much fun working with other people, because I find that I learn from them. I'm adding value, but I'm also learning, which is what keeps me passionate about what I do. I mean, if I'm not learning, as the old stories, the movies we watch, the people we meet are where we learn, right? Aside from the books we read. And so collaboration is critical. And I've seen it fall apart for 2 key reasons. And then I'll give you what my quick framework is. And that is, there's not absolute clarity and alignment on the outcomes for that collaboration. Okay? Right? Because, and that sounds so simple, but you think about it, say you're doing this in 2 departments with someone in an organization, or you're collaborating with people in different companies, which is what I like to do a lot, right? And,
yes.
And there's different strategies. And if that collaboration doesn't fit both of those strategies, it's going to fail, because you're not going to get the alignment and the support through implementation, because it's working against the strategy of either the 2 departments or the two different organizations when you do a larger collaboration, right? So by getting real clarity on what we want this collaboration to accomplish, truly accomplishes many things. That's important. And then the other piece is, and this is something I think is very critical. It sounds obvious, but it's missed so often. And that is, there's got to be an inside person. Okay. Let's say you're collaborating with somebody in another company. Okay. And there's got to be somebody in each company that's got the influence across multiple silos, right? Because typically that collaboration is going to create some change, even if it fits the strategy. So you got to have somebody that can influence people to say, now we got to change this and we got to do that. If not, it's going to fall apart, right? So, and without alignment, when alignment breaks down, no one connects the dots internally. So those are 2 critical things, I think, what I've found when they're not present from the get-go. Collaboration is going to fail, right? And then I guess my framework is, and I talk about this, I get into this a lot more detail in the book, okay? But it's really 6 steps, okay? And the steps sound simple, but it's how you navigate your way through. That's why some companies will ask me to facilitate the process. But I'm not saying you got to have me to facilitate it, right? I'm saying if you have somebody, or somebody's got to facilitate the process to make it, to drive it. But step 1 is, we've already talked about this, define the outcome. And what does winning look like, right? Get that clear. And then step 2 is map the path. What's the strategy, or what's the approach we're going to take? And then align the players, get all the players in sooner rather than later, okay? Into what we're doing. Right. And then you're assigning, step 4 is assign the ownership, who owns each piece. Okay. And then step 5, what are going to be our roadblocks when we go to implement? Right. And how do we anticipate dealing with them? Right. As a team. All right. Or both companies looking at the challenges within each side of their company, or both departments or areas of a company. And then step 6, measure and adjust. Okay, set checkpoints to track progress and course correct. The old story, managing a company or managing a collaboration, Christy, it's a change process, right? As you know, in the work you do, it's a change process. And in a change process, you always got to be ready to embrace the change and then embrace the pivots that's going to happen. So, build into your collaborative model, your template, what are our checkpoints, how we're going to track progress, and then how are we going to go about course correcting, right? And I think that type of thing, that type of framework builds energy, momentum, and builds towards results, if that makes sense.
Right. These frameworks are just simple steps to help you remember the processes, right? It's just structure. And so we've talked about the examples of the windshield process, the 6-step collaboration, but now I just want you to highlight, because we don't give everything away for free. You've given so much great advice, but the backbone of what you do is based on your 3 C's framework, okay? And so if somebody's not familiar with the 3 C's, tell us a little bit about that and how you've leveraged that to support businesses with scaling and helping leaders to face the challenges that they may experience when trying to grow their business.
Okay. The short version, Christy, is 3 C's are clarify, chart, and co-align. Okay. Clarify what the challenge really is. Chart your path forward. Okay. And what I mean by chart the path is you define your outcomes, you identify your obstacles, but you talk about the non-negotiables. And what I mean by them are what must happen and what cannot happen. Okay. And it's sort of like picture yourself on a 12-lane highway, right, Christy? And picture you've got guardrails on each side of the highway. You can pick a lot of different lanes to get where you're going, right? But there's guardrails that keep you in there. Okay. So when I say chart the path, I'm not talking yet about a detailed project plan. I'm talking about that approach to get to where you want to get to. How often have we, as a leader, I remember saying to people, okay, go away and build the plan. And they'd come back and I'd say, no, I don't want to do it that way. Or, yeah, no, we need to do it this way. And by doing that, I'm actually taking ownership away from them. But what if I told them up front what were the non-negotiables? Then when they walk away, they got a clear highway. Now I don't have to take ownership away from them, right? When they go to do the plan. So there's so many things with this. Again, it's a simple framework, but it's all about how you manage people and do the thinking within it. So you got clarify, chart, and then co-align is involve the right people early in the bumper stage, the non-negotiable stage, et cetera, so that when you send your implementation team away to build the implementation plan, you've already got a lot of alignment, right? In that process. We talked earlier about letting go, control. This is a great way to learn to let go and control, because you can still control without taking control away from the people that really need to do it, right? So it's to me, it's a great process for any kind of challenge, okay? And it's just a discipline of thinking. And there are 3 things, and then I'll come up for air, that I think are critical to implementing it. And the 3 are, Christy, 1 is called balancing the science and the art. That whatever approach you're going to use, recognize that science that's worked somewhere else. There's an art to how you adjust it for your situation. Okay. And so learn how to rethink things that have worked elsewhere and how you got to adjust them in your world. Number 1. 2, ask laser focused questions. The discipline in questioning keeps leaders from chasing symptoms. The right questions cut through the noise and expose the real challenges, right? And learning to ask questions is an art in itself. So as a leader, learn to ask questions and stop giving people all the answers, right? Okay. And then the last piece is close the knowledge gaps. I always say to people, I care more about what you know and not what you don't know. Because if I can extract what they know, now I don't have a blank sheet of paper. And now it's a lot easier to identify the gaps. And then together we can figure out, is it a bandwidth gap? Is it a skill gap? Or is it a knowledge gap? Right? And then we can fill those gaps together. So in tackling any challenge, clarify, chart, co-align, learn how to balance the science and the art, learn how to ask good questions, and learn how to identify and then close the knowledge gaps. And then you can use this process to tackle any big challenge.
And you've given such great advice. This has been such a great discussion. So I have to ask you more about you. So I have one final question. You have said that success is about building something that can thrive without you. And you mentioned earlier that people want you to come in and teach the processes, right? And you have begun really to expanding, teaching people how to build these, design and implement these processes so that they can have the success of a business that can thrive without them. So you're giving people their time back. So you are out there and you're focused on expanding your reach through online programs and speaking engagements. And so what's your bigger vision for leaders that you serve, and what kind of impact do you hope that your work continues to have as your business evolves?
You know, 𝗪𝗫, I get this question all the time in different ways, and it's a great question, and thank you for asking it, because to me it's like real simple. At this stage of my life and the stage of my career, the bigger vision for me is I just want to help leaders stop feeling like growth has to be as chaotic as it is, right? I mean, let's face it, growth is chaotic. There's no way around that. It's like gravity. What goes up has to come down. Well, growth is going to be chaotic, but it doesn't have to be, okay? And that's the pain that I always find in myself when I work with someone. You know, I've had people say to me, you know, it's like he's living through me when he's helping me. And to be honest, I go back to my own emotions of what they're going through, okay? Because I was through that. But I want to help. I want to stop that feeling like it's got to be chaotic. I want to give them the tools, the systems, and ways of thinking that'll give them real confidence to move forward. And if I can help, I guess if I can help them preserve what makes their company unique, what is that cultural DNA that they don't have to lose just because they're becoming that next level company, okay? You're building something that lasts beyond them. And that ripple effect is huge in my mind. So that's sort of the impact that extends well beyond the balance sheet. And that's sort of what why I'm still doing what I do today and why I have such a passion for it.
Yeah, you talked a lot in this interview today about the power of people, the process of implementing, and the power of systems as well. And so if people want to stay connected with you, Pat, tell us where we can find you. And of course, we're going to have all of Pat's information in the description box, but tell us where we can find you and connect with you, as well as anything that you have coming up next that you want to let the audience know about.
Well, thank you for asking, 𝗪𝗫. I appreciate that. I think that the easiest way is my website, 𝗵𝗵𝘁.com. That's 𝗵𝗵𝗁𝗁.com. There's some free stuff on there to help leaders start to think differently. Okay. There's some, reasonably priced online courses and master classes, and I've got more of those coming out. And for the time that I allocate to work personally with leadership teams, which I love doing, there's ways to talk to me about that. So I think just go to the website and please reach out if I can help in any way. And LinkedIn, I do a lot on LinkedIn. I had somebody ask me the other day, he said, how do you have time for LinkedIn? But to me, it's like LinkedIn, I'm not a big social media guy with all the other ones, but I love LinkedIn because a lot of the people that I can help are there. And I spend time there sharing information and dialoguing. So you can find me there under my name, and I would love to hear from people there. So I think that's the best way to reach me, and I appreciate you asking.
Well, thank you so much. So Pat is an example of someone who took the experiences that he had, and he is leveraging that to continue to build systems, talk about the power of people and connection. And he is serving as a mentor and coach and building out spaces to help transition the mindset of leaders and help businesses scale so that you can see the potential in your own business. I love that. That's a great example of the type of people that we interview for this series. So I want to say thank you for joining us today. I always say this, but whether you're listening today, tomorrow, or 10 years from now, right? The advice that we give is timeless. And so be sure to check out Pat, and I hope that you learned something and enjoyed this experience. Thank you. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you, 𝗶𝗫.